What happens when a dress becomes a disaster? Not torn, not stained, not poorly tailored, but socially radioactive. That's the question that explodes into the center of this story, and it starts with a single image. One gown, one promotional shot, one woman who can ignite the internet with a blink, and one luxury CEO who, according to whispers, allegedly uttered a sentence no brand ever expects to direct at a high-visibility public figure. Thanks, but don't wear it again. But why would a fashion house react that way? Why would a $1,695 gown turn into a symbol of panic instead of prestige? And how could a celebrity appearance, something that usually boosts sales, spikes demand, and sends website traffic into orbit, do the exact opposite? These are the questions that pull us into the heart of this unraveling narrative, and they are the reason people are talking, speculating, laughing, recoiling, and arguing online. Because even if you think you already know the story, even if you saw the photos, even if you heard the chatter, there is something deeper here, something unexpected, something uncomfortable, something that reveals how quickly perception can flip and how fragile a brand becomes when tied to someone the public has conflicting feelings about. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Picture it, a glossy Netflix promotional rollout, carefully lit, color-graded, composed to signal luxury, aspiration, elegance, and narrative mystique. Meghan Markle positioned front and center, draped in a gown valued at nearly $1,700, designed by Galvan London, a label built on refinement, minimalism, and quiet sophistication. A brand beloved by brides, actresses, diplomats' daughters, and women who prefer their fashion statements to whisper rather than shout. Normally, that combination would be a dream. A global streaming platform, a worldwide audience, a figure whose wardrobe choices generate headlines and hashtags. So why did the digital air feel tense rather than electric? Why did comments shift from admiration to suspicion? Why did the story pivot not toward glamour, but toward an accusation that should have been absurd, yet somehow wasn't treated that way? Accused of stealing a gown. Can you imagine? A woman with wealth, contracts, visibility, production deals, American affluence, royal connections, suddenly framed by online voices as someone who didn't obtain the dress legitimately. Was it said as a joke, as mockery, as metaphor? Or was it something darker, a reflection of how audiences now interpret everything she does through a lens of doubt? Here's where it gets even more fascinating. Normally, when a celebrity sparks controversy, the brand benefits anyway. Outrage fuels attention. Attention fuels curiosity. Curiosity fuels clicks. And clicks drive conversions. But this time, the needle didn't move up. It moved down. Quietly. Sharply. Embarrassingly. And that's where the tension begins to tighten. Because luxury brands depend on association, and association depends on public feeling. Not logic. Not accuracy. Not truth. Feeling. Perception. Emotional reaction. And if the public ties you to someone whose cultural narrative is shifting, wobbling, or fracturing, the fallout arrives faster than executives can refresh their analytics dashboards. So why does this matter now? Why does this promo moment land differently from past ones? What turned a fashion cameo into a crisis trigger? The timing. Always the timing. Meghan had already become a figure the internet treated like a cultural weather vane. Adored, criticized, defended, mocked, analyzed, and deconstructed on a daily cycle. Netflix fatigue had set in. Public sympathy had cooled. Scandals, rumors, contradictions, interviews, podcasts, every appearance added weight. And when something already feels heavy, it doesn't take much for it to tip. Which leads us to Galvan London and CEO Katherine Holmgren, a woman known for meticulous brand protection, measured marketing, and selective association. A leader who understands that fashion isn't just fabric and stitching, it's identity, symbolism, and risk. So imagine, just for a moment, her reaction when instead of celebration, retailers start hesitating. Customers start pausing. Loyal buyers start asking whether there are other designers with similar silhouettes, just without the controversy. Imagine internal discussions. Imagine tense emails. Imagine someone, somewhere inside that corporate structure, saying the sentence no brand wants to say, "We didn't ask for this." But here's where the story grows even sharper. The accusation online, the claim that Meghan stole the gown, wasn't treated like a wild conspiracy. People repeated it, commented on it, screen grabbed it, attached it to memes. It snowballed, not because anyone believed it literally, but because it fit a narrative the internet enjoys. The idea of someone trying to maintain an image while the seams split underneath. Was it fair? Was it justified? Was it malicious? Or was it simply entertainment dressed up as commentary? Ask yourself, when was the last time a rumor needed evidence to thrive? When was the last time a tweet needed credibility to spread? When was the last time the court of public opinion waited for facts? This is the ecosystem Meghan now exists in, one where every gesture expands into symbolism and every outfit becomes a referendum, which means that a dress is never just a dress. It's a story, a trigger, a reaction generator. And for Galvan London, that reaction did not produce admiration. It produced recoil, dip in sales, scrutiny from buyers. And if the whispers are true, a CEO who allegedly expressed what many quietly felt. Thanks, but don't wear it again. Was it said publicly? No. Was it officially documented? No. Was it plausible enough for people to repeat? Absolutely. And plausibility is all a rumor needs to become a headline in waiting. But let's pause and ask something deeper. Why would the public believe such a claim? Why would the accusation of stealing stick, even temporarily? Because stories don't spread based on truth. They spread based on emotional alignment. Some people wanted to believe it. Some enjoyed believing it. Some didn't care whether it was real because the narrative felt satisfying. Fashion, reputation, and scandal share the same bloodstream, image. And when an image shifts, everything attached to it feels unstable. Now imagine the atmosphere inside Galvan's headquarters. Marketing teams reviewing digital sentiment. Sales analysts comparing previous promo effects. Retail partners requesting distance. PR advisors weighing silence versus subtle redirection. A brand that once celebrated celebrity association, now calculating how to escape one. And this is where the introduction sharpens into its most compelling point. The moment when everyone realizes the story is not about a dress, or a promo, or even an accusation. It's about what happens when influence reverses. When the person who once elevated brands begins to erode them. When wearing a product becomes a liability instead of a benefit. When a fashion house fears visibility instead of craving it. Have you ever seen that happen before? Have you witnessed a celebrity whose presence damaged rather than boosted? Have you wondered how quietly those conversations happen behind the scenes? Here's the truth. Fashion's most dramatic moments don't occur on runways. They happen in boardrooms, in whispered calls, in inventory projections, in reputational forecasts. That's where panic lives. Not loud, but cold. And yet, this introduction still hasn't revealed the biggest twist. Because the story doesn't stop at sales decline. It doesn't stop at accusations. It doesn't stop at memes, reactions, or speculation. There is something else that happened after those promo images went live. Something that reshaped the narrative again. Something that blindsided even the people who thought they'd already seen the punchline. Something that turned confusion into alarm, and alarm into fallout. It should have been a win. That's the part that makes this story so unbelievable. This moment, this promo shot, this carefully curated visual was supposed to be the kind of image that brands dream about. The kind that sends search engines spinning, fashion bloggers typing, and luxury buyers reaching for their cards. But instead, it became the beginning of something no one in the fashion world expected. So here's the question that jolts the story awake. How did a single promotional outfit create shockwaves instead of sales? How did a luxury gown become the spark that ignited a narrative of embarrassment, backlash, and unexpected consequences? And why did the internet react not with admiration, but with suspicion? Let's step into the moment as if we're watching it unfold in real time. Netflix rolls out a new promo featuring Meghan Markle. Poised, polished, framed in soft lighting design to make the gown shimmer with quiet elegance. The cut is sleek. The color carries that understated confidence luxury fashion is known for. The price tag, just shy of $1,700, places it in the realm of aspirational exclusivity. Anyone who saw it would assume the same thing. This is the kind of exposure that makes brands salivate. The kind that transforms a dress from a garment into a cultural talking point. The kind that sends customers rushing to claim the look before it sells out. But something strange happened. Something off. something that didn't align with the fashion rulebook or the laws of consumer behavior. The reaction wasn't celebratory. It wasn't admiring. It wasn't filled with excitement. Instead, it came with raised eyebrows, sarcasm, and a growing sense of discomfort. You could feel it online, the shift in tone, the ripple of hesitation, the laughter that didn't sound like flattery. People weren't saying, "I want that dress." They were saying, "Why that dress? Why now? Why her?" Ask yourself something. Have you ever looked at a moment that should have been perfect and felt that something invisible was working against it? That there was a current, a vibration, a subtext that changed how people interpreted what they saw? That's exactly what happened here. Meghan Markle wearing a Galvan London gown should have been straightforward. Fashion meets celebrity. Celebrity meets visibility. Visibility meets influence. Influence meets profit. But the world doesn't work in straight lines anymore, especially not when the name attached to the dress is Meghan's. Because Meghan isn't just a public figure. She's a litmus test, a trigger, a cultural divide wearing mascara and contour. The audience doesn't simply react to what she wears, they react to what she represents to them personally. And that reaction isn't unified. It isn't predictable. It isn't safe for brands who rely on widespread admiration rather than polarized intensity. So instead of sparking desire, the gown sparked debate. Instead of elevating the dress, it drew attention to the tension surrounding the person wearing it. And in the world of luxury fashion, association is everything. But here's where the story becomes even more cinematic. While the image was circulating and reactions were forming, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something subtle but powerful. People began searching for the dress, not to buy it, but to mock it. They weren't screenshotting it to admire the cut. They were screenshotting it to pair it with captions, jokes, and comparisons. They weren't tagging friends saying, "Look how beautiful." They were tagging them saying, "Look at this." Tone matters. And the tone was shifting against the dress, the wearer, and the brand all at once. Now imagine you're inside Galvan London's marketing analytics portal. You're watching real-time website data. You're monitoring engagement patterns. You're measuring conversion potential. At first glance, traffic ticks upward. Good news, right? But then comes the part no fashion label wants to see. The bounce rate climbs. The add-to-cart numbers stall. Wishlist saves flatline. Interest without intention. Visibility without desirability. And worse, returns increase from customers who purchased before the photos dropped. Why? Because people suddenly didn't want to be associated with something that was becoming a punchline instead of a prestige marker. Have you ever watched a situation that looked successful from the outside, but was quietly imploding underneath? That's what this moment was for Galvan. The world thought Meghan wearing their gown was publicity. Inside the brand, it was becoming a liability. Luxury fashion is built on illusion. The illusion of exclusivity, aspiration, elegance, and elevated identity. But illusion breaks quickly when public sentiment shifts. And all it took was one promo photo to tilt perception. Here's something most people don't realize. Fashion exposure is only valuable when the audience wants to emulate the wearer. Admiration drives imitation. But imitation collapses when the audience rejects the symbol. The Meghan effect, once powerful, profitable, and instant, had begun reversing. Instead of people saying, "She wore it so I want it," the sentiment became, "She wore it so maybe I don't." That reversal is the kind of nightmare brand strategists lose sleep over. It means identity contamination. It means consumer distancing. It means emotional disassociation. And that brings us to an even more intriguing question. Why did this particular promo ignite such a reaction? Why did this moment, this dress, this rollout become the turning point? Timing. Timing is everything. Meghan had already been navigating a volatile reputation cycle, with public interest fluctuating not from admiration to neutrality, but from fascination to fatigue. Netflix projects associated with her were no longer met with anticipation, but with skepticism. So when this promo appeared, it didn't feel fresh. It didn't feel exciting. It didn't feel aspirational. It felt repetitive. And repetition without goodwill breeds irritation. Now add the accusation. The claim that Meghan stole the gown. The accusation that should have been dismissed instantly, yet wasn't. The rumor that spread not because it was credible, but because people found it narratively satisfying. And once that rumor attached itself to the image, The gown was no longer just a garment. It became evidence in a fictional trial conducted online. Whether viewers believed it literally didn't matter. What mattered was that it framed the dress as a symbol of something sneaky, something deceptive, something undeserved. Fashion cannot survive symbolism like that, especially not luxury fashion. So here we are, at the center of a moment that should have been triumphant but became toxic instead. And inside Galvan London, executives were watching it unfold with growing discomfort. You can almost picture the expressions, the strained smiles, the controlled breathing, the whispered statements that sound calm but feel panicked. And somewhere, internally or externally, someone uttered the line that would become the most repeated quote associated with this entire story. "Thanks, but don't wear it again." Whether it was sarcasm, frustration, or strategy, the meaning was the same. This was not the kind of exposure the brand wanted. But here's the twist. This was only the beginning. Because the reaction to the promo image wasn't the peak of the story. It was the trigger. What unfolded next would reshape the fashion narrative, deepen the brand anxiety, and reveal that the gown was only the first domino in a much larger chain reaction. Because this wasn't the first time a dress caused a crisis, and it wasn't going to be the last. It starts with a contrast. A contrast so sharp that once you see it, you can't unsee it. On one side, Galvan London, a brand known for clean lines, architectural silhouettes, subtle luxury, and the kind of elegance that speaks softly but confidently. On the other side, Meghan Markle, a public figure whose presence doesn't whisper but detonates. A woman whose image no longer rests on simplicity, but on spectacle, scrutiny, polarization, and headline combustion. So here's the question that opens this chapter like a flare in the dark. What happens when a brand built on quiet sophistication becomes linked to someone whose reputation is anything but quiet? Can a label rooted in calm survive an association with a personality surrounded by noise? Or does the identity of the wearer overpower the identity of the designer? To understand how these forces collided, we need to step back and examine Galvan London for what it truly represents. This isn't a brand built on flash, excess, or shock value. It wasn't born from celebrity chaos or viral gimmicks. It emerged from a philosophy, minimalist femininity, confidence without theatrics, sensuality without spectacle. Brides wear Galvan when they want elegance without cliché. Actresses choose it when they want to be noticed without begging for attention. Diplomats' daughters select it when cameras flash, but statements must remain controlled. Galvan is the fashion equivalent of a raised eyebrow, a soft inhale, a still surface with depth beneath it. Now compare that to Meghan's public identity today. Her image used to be associated with poise, modernity, grace, and a fresh cultural rewrite of royalty. But over time, that narrative shifted. Interviews, contradictions, disputes, dramatized revelations, polarized media framing, and a pattern of public fatigue altered how audiences see her. People don't project simplicity onto her anymore. They project complexity, chaos, contradiction, and controversy. Whether fair or not, whether justified or invented, that perception clings to her like static. And perception, not truth, dictates brand association. So imagine the emotional collision. Galvan represents clarity. Meghan, at this moment in cultural memory, represents complication. Galvan represents refinement. Meghan represents reaction. Galvan represents calm. Meghan represents conversation, and not the peaceful kind. What does that do to a brand whose survival depends on aesthetic purity? Ask yourself, would a meditation spa invite a firework display into its lobby? Would a whispering gallery amplify a drumline? Would a luxury label built on subtlety embrace a figure who triggers digital shouting? But here's where the story deepens. Celebrity endorsements are not always intentional. Sometimes, a brand chooses the wearer. Other times, the wearer chooses the brand. But the most dangerous situation happens when neither chooses, yet the public believes the connection is deliberate. That's what happened here. Galvan didn't announce a collaboration. There was no press release, no campaign, no strategic alignment. And yet, the internet treated the gown as a partnership. People assumed endorsement. People assumed affiliation. People assumed approval. An assumption is the enemy of brand control. Think about how reputation functions in the fashion world. It isn't just about design quality. It's about emotional resonance. Fashion buyers make decisions not only with their wallets, but with their identities. They purchase what makes them feel smarter, prettier, richer, more worldly, more refined, more admired. And when a brand becomes linked to someone whose public reception is fractured, consumers don't just hesitate, they retreat. They protect themselves from association. They avoid anything that could make them appear aligned with something socially precarious. This is where the psychological shift becomes visible. Meghan wearing the dress didn't make people want to join her. It made them want to avoid becoming her. The gown didn't symbolize elegance, it symbolized risk. And luxury is allergic to risk. Luxury survives on predictability, predictable desire, predictable aspiration, predictable admiration. Meghan's current public persona, whether people love her or resent her, is unpredictable. She is emotional dynamite in a silk glove. And dynamite doesn't pair well with satin. Now let's turn our attention to Galvan's leadership. Katherine Holmgren, the CEO, is known for being deliberate, calculated, selective. Every brand aligned with Galvan is chosen with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a flawless gemstone. So imagine her watching this unfold. Imagine her studying sentiment analysis reports. Imagine her comparing historic celebrity impact charts. Imagine her noticing that instead of the usual prestige bump, the brand was experiencing what analysts quietly call a repulsion curve. That is the opposite of influence, the opposite of endorsement, the opposite of desirability. And then there's the irony. Meghan once represented exactly what Galvan needed: modern, diverse, thoughtful femininity, the kind that signals cultural evolution. But reputations age like fruit, not like diamonds. Sometimes they ripen. Sometimes they ferment. Sometimes they rot in public view while the person attached to them insists nothing has changed. And when that happens, the brands linked to them suffer, not because of what the celebrity does, but because of how the audience feels. Emotion drives commerce far more than style does. Let's pause here and ask the audience a pointed question. Have you ever admired something but refused to buy it because of who else owned it? Have you ever avoided a product because it reminded you of someone you didn't want to resemble? Have you ever changed your mind about something simply because public opinion shifted around it? If you have, then you already understand what happened to Galvan's dress. The public didn't reject the gown, they rejected the association. And rejection spreads faster than admiration. Here's another layer most people never consider. Fashion editors talk. Buyers talk. Boutique owners talk. Influencers talk. Quietly, indirectly, in coded language that protects them from accusation. And when they talk, they exchange signals that determine what becomes hot, lukewarm, or untouchable. And the signal circulating around Galvan after the promo wasn't excitement. It was caution. Soft, polite caution, the kind that sounds like this. Beautiful, but maybe not the right moment. Elegant, but perhaps better for a different face. Stunning, but timing is everything. That's how brands die without ever being told they're dying. Not through scandal, through distancing. Meanwhile, the accusation about the stolen gown, the bizarre, meme-fueled claim, didn't just swirl around Meghan. It splashed onto Galvan. Suddenly, the brand wasn't associated with exclusivity. It was associated with alleged impropriety, even though the rumor had no evidence, even though no rational person could believe it literally, even though the narrative was obviously symbolic mockery. The association still formed, and once formed, it stuck. Because fashion is not made of silk, sequins, or stitching. Fashion is made of story, and the story surrounding this gown mutated from exposure to embarrassment, from elegance to irony, from desirability to avoidance. But here's the part that turns the chapter from observation into escalation. The sales numbers confirmed what sentiment predicted. Retail partners hesitated. Stylists passed. Bridal inquiries faded. And internally, someone, whether in jest, exhaustion, or strategic clarity, allegedly voiced the sentence that defined the moment. Thanks, but don't wear it again. Was it said aloud in a boardroom? Was it whispered in a hallway? Was it relayed through a retailer? Or was it simply the unspoken consensus everyone felt but didn't articulate? The truth may never be confirmed, but the effect was undeniable. And yet, the tension doesn't end here. Because this chapter only explains the identity mismatch. It doesn't explain the collapse that followed. Something happened after this, something even more startling, even more disruptive. even more revealing about how fragile a brand can become when tied to a volatile public figure. Because after the sales dashboard revealed the real blow, a second narrative exploded, one that no one inside Galvan saw coming, and one that changed the story entirely. Luxury brands don't fall overnight. Not without warning. Not without scandal. Not without some catastrophic moment that rattles the foundations and sends insiders scrambling for explanations. Yet what happened to Galvan London after Meghan Markle appeared in that Netflix promo gown defied every established rule of fashion economics. That's the hook that pulls this chapter open. How does a brand built on stability suddenly experience a measurable decline because of a single dress worn by a single figure in a single promotional frame? And how did that decline happen so quickly, so quietly, and so shockingly that even analysts who specialize in predicting market shifts found themselves asking the same question the public would later whisper? What caused the drop? Let's start with the numbers, not in spreadsheets or charts, but in the emotional way that brands feel them. First comes curiosity. Website traffic rises. Search queries spike. Product pages light up like New York windows at dusk. At first glance, it looks like success. Then comes the first tremor. The conversion rate stalls. People look, but they don't buy. Then comes the second tremor. Abandoned carts pile up like unclaimed luggage. Then comes the third. Return requests begin to surface from customers who purchased the gown before the promo dropped, suddenly afraid of being linked to the face wearing it. That's when the realization hits. The attention isn't admiration. It's scrutiny. Have you ever been complimented by someone whose tone made it feel like an insult? That's what this moment was for Galvan. The rise in traffic wasn't a celebration, it was a warning signal. And inside the brand's digital analytics hub, someone noticed. Someone always notices first. It's never the CEO. It's never the board. It's never the press team. It's a data analyst, a junior strategist, someone whose name the public will never know. Staring at numbers that don't make sense and feeling a chill that does. But here's where the story becomes even more compelling. The decline didn't happen gradually. It happened abruptly, a drop sharp enough to raise alarms. Buyers hesitated. Retail partners froze. Influencers pivoted. Like birds sensing a storm before humans feel a raindrop, the fashion world reacted instinctively. They didn't wait for confirmation. They didn't request clarification. They simply stepped back. That's how reputational contagion works. Not through evidence, but through intuition. And intuition spreads faster than truth. This is the part where the audience needs to pause and ask themselves something uncomfortable. Have you ever avoided standing near someone simply because others were moving away? Not because you knew why, not because you had information, but because you sensed something? That is exactly how fashion markets behave. They don't respond to logic. They respond to mood. And the mood surrounding the Galvan gown shifted from intrigue to avoidance in record time. Why? Because this wasn't just about Meghan wearing a dress. It was about what she represented at that moment. Fatigue, controversy, overexposure, narrative saturation. Audiences weren't reacting to the gown. They were reacting to everything they already felt about Meghan. The gown merely activated it. And when a brand becomes the trigger for feelings unrelated to its product, it enters dangerous territory. Now imagine the internal response. Emails with subject lines like update, tracking shift, unexpected metrics, and need visibility ASAP. Meetings suddenly added to calendars. Slack channels quietly renamed. Executives requesting sentiment scans. PR teams crafting holding statements just in case the story expanded. No one panics out loud, but everyone feels the tightening. Luxury brands are like castles. They don't crumble from siege, they fracture from hairline cracks. And then came the moment that confirmed the fear. A major retail partner, the kind whose name carries weight in the industry, delayed a reorder. Not canceled, delayed. That single gesture is the fashion world's equivalent of a raised eyebrow. It signals doubt. It signals recalibration. It signals, maybe we shouldn't stand too close. And once one retailer hesitates, others follow. It's instinctive. It's contagious. It's silent. Meanwhile, online discourse had already mutated. The accusation that Meghan stole the gown, absurd on its face, fueled the downturn unintentionally. People weren't just reacting to the dress. They were reacting to the narrative surrounding it. The gown became a symbol, a prop in a cultural comedy routine where the punchline was always Meghan. And luxury cannot survive being a punchline. Luxury thrives on reverence, not ridicule. Ask yourself, would you spend nearly $2,000 on a dress if people might joke about it? If wearing it might invite commentary? If the garment became shorthand for drama, memes, mockery, or suspicion? Consumers don't just buy clothing, they buy emotional safety. And in this moment, Galvan no longer felt safe. Now imagine Katherine Holmgren, the CEO, receiving the first full internal report. Not the light version, not the softened version, the real version, with charts showing downward curves, with screenshots of sentiment heat maps, with retailer behavior indicators trending toward amber instead of green. Picture her looking at numbers that contradict the very foundation of fashion marketing, the belief that celebrity exposure equals brand elevation. What happens when that formula fails? What happens when the brand identity weakens because of who wears it? But here's the twist that makes this chapter even more dramatic. This wasn't the bottom. This wasn't the climax. This wasn't the full drop. This was just the beginning of the decline, the moment before the slope steepened. Because something happened after this internal recognition. Something that turned concern into alarm. Something that shifted the narrative from unexpected problem to potential crisis. It started with a conversation, quiet, strategic, and urgent. A meeting in which someone asked the question no brand ever wants to confront. What if association itself is now the risk? That question opened a door that led to a far deeper realization. And that realization led to a second wave of decline, one that couldn't be attributed to coincidence or temporary reaction. Because while the brand was still processing the first drop, a new development hit the public conversation, a development that reframed the story and made the fallout even harder to control. And that's where the next chapter begins. Because just when the brand thought it understood the cause, a second narrative exploded, and this time, the consequences spread even faster than the numbers falling on the dashboard. That it only takes one comment to ignite a wildfire. One sentence, one sarcastic remark, one anonymous account planting a seed that shouldn't grow, but does. That's how this chapter begins, because the accusation that Meghan Markle stole the $1,695 Galvan London gown didn't emerge from a news outlet, a fashion critic, or an insider leak. It came from the internet, the most unpredictable storyteller in modern history. And here's the hook that jolts the narrative forward. The accusation wasn't treated like a joke. It wasn't dismissed. It didn't fade. It spread, fast, wide, and with a momentum that even seasoned observers couldn't explain. Let's rewind to the moment the accusation first appeared. A comment under a promo still. A tweet with a mocking tone. A forum thread with a smirk hidden between the words. It wasn't presented as fact, but as a jab, a satirical swipe at Meghan's public perception. But satire only works when audiences can recognize exaggeration. And in this case, the line between exaggeration and believability had eroded. People didn't laugh it away. They didn't roll their eyes. They leaned in. They repeated it. They embellished it. They turned it into a storyline. Ask yourself, why would a claim like that land with such force? Why would something so obviously untrue gain traction? Why would people engage with it instead of rejecting it? The answer reveals something unsettling about reputation. Once a public figure becomes associated with controversy, even unrelated accusations feel plausible to some audiences. Not because they are true, but because they feel emotionally aligned with existing narratives. Perception becomes glue, and once something sticks, it doesn't unstick easily. Online platforms became accelerants. TikTok turned it into a comedic skit. Reddit framed it as allegedly humorous speculation. Twitter, or whatever name it now carries, turned it into a hashtag. Instagram wrapped it into meme templates. Suddenly, the accusation wasn't fringe, it was everywhere. Not stated as fact, but repeated enough times that it didn't need to be. Repetition replaces evidence. Rhythm replaces reasoning. And in the age of viral interpretation, a rumor doesn't have to be believable. It just has to be amusing. But here's where the story sharpens. The accusation didn't just affect Meghan's image. It contaminated Galvan London by association. The gown became tainted, not literally, but symbolically. Fashion consumers, especially luxury ones, are hypersensitive to narrative. They don't want clothing that invites questions. They don't want garments that require explanations. They don't want pieces associated with mockery, controversy, or reputational baggage. So while the accusation targeted Meghan, its impact hit Galvan. Have you ever watched someone suffer consequences for a situation they didn't cause? That's what happened here. Galvan didn't fuel the rumor. They didn't acknowledge it. They didn't defend against it. They maintained silence. But silence, in the digital age, is no longer neutral. Silence can feel like affirmation, or avoidance, or discomfort, and the public projected meaning into the void. Fashion commentators joined in, not formally, but indirectly. Phrases like unfortunate timing, complicated optics, and brand misalignment began appearing in trend recaps. Fashion blogs referenced the dress without naming the accusation, but the implication hovered like perfume in a closed room. The dress was no longer simply a dress. It was a cultural artifact of contradiction. Here's the irony that twists the narrative even tighter. Meghan didn't comment. Netflix didn't comment. Galvan didn't comment. And that triple silence created the perfect greenhouse for rumor growth. When people don't know the truth, they invent one. When they don't receive clarity, they fill in blanks with imagination. And imagination spreads faster than statements ever could. Meanwhile, inside Galvan London, the mood shifted from concern to unease. The rumor gave context to the sales decline. It gave language to the discomfort. It offered a narrative explanation, even if untrue, for the sudden dip in brand desirability. Executives don't need accuracy to react. They need a story that explains the numbers. And this rumor, however absurd, gave them one. Now imagine the brand's internal conversations. Someone asks, "Is this damaging?" Someone else replies, "Not because people believe it, but because they enjoy it." That's the danger. A rumor doesn't have to be credible to be corrosive. It only has to be entertaining. Let's ask the audience another question. Have you ever watched a joke turn into a reputation? Have you ever seen someone mocked so relentlessly that the mockery became their public identity? Have you ever witnessed perception overpower reality? That's what happened here. The rumor mutated into a narrative. The narrative mutated into sentiment. And sentiment mutated into behavior. Consumer behavior, retail behavior, brand behavior, journalistic behavior. All from a claim that no one could validate, no one officially repeated, and no one publicly endorsed. This is where the emotional tone of the chapter shifts again, because Meghan wasn't the only one being discussed anymore. People began speculating about how Galvan felt. Did they approve of her wearing it? Did they loan it? Did they request its return? Did they regret the association? These questions weren't answered, so they multiplied. Fashion insiders, the anonymous kind who speak in winks and ellipses, began hinting at internal frustration. Not confirmed, not sourced, but whispered. And whispers are louder than statements in industries built on mystique. You can almost hear the imagined dialogue forming in digital spaces. Did they ask her not to wear their designs again? Did the CEO really say the line that went viral? Did the brand distance itself privately? Did stylists receive quiet instructions? None of these questions were answered, and the lack of answers fueled the fire. But here's the part that elevates the chapter from rumor analysis to narrative escalation. The rumor didn't stay confined to fashion circles. It spilled into discussions about Meghan's broader reputation. Authenticity, transparency, privilege, resentment, class perception, cultural dissonance. The dress became a symbol in a much larger cultural conversation. That's when the tone of online commentary changed again, from mockery to theorizing. People weren't joking anymore. They were dissecting, evaluating, interpreting. And that shift had consequences. Because once a rumor evolves into a theory, it gains intellectual legitimacy, even if unsupported. And once legitimacy enters the conversation, brands panic. This is when Galvan London, according to circulating speculation, allegedly reached an emotional tipping point. Not officially, not publicly, but internally, where reputational fear lives. And that fear created the quote that defined the moment. "Thanks, but don't wear it again." Whether it was ever spoken doesn't matter. People believed someone could have said it. And belief drives narrative. Narrative drives reaction. Reaction drives market movement. Which brings us to the cliffhanger that leads into the next chapter. Because the rumor was only the spark. What came next was the acceleration. The moment when the story stopped being a joke and became a commercial threat. The rumor morphed into something even sharper, and the consequences were about to reach far beyond memes, mockery, and speculation. Sometimes saying nothing screams the loudest. That's the line that opens this chapter, because the most shocking part of the entire fallout wasn't the meme storm, the rumor, the mockery, or even the sales decline. It was the silence. Total silence. Meghan didn't address the accusation. Netflix didn't clarify the origins of the gown. Galvan London didn't issue a statement, denial, distancing note, or subtle clarification. And that silence became the accelerant that turned a rumor into a narrative, and a narrative into a crisis. So here's the hook. Why did no one speak? And how did that silence deepen the damage? To understand why staying quiet was so explosive, we need to look at how PR response strategies usually work. In situations like this, a fashion controversy, an online rumor, a social media swirl, brands have three traditional options. The first is denial, sharp, swift, definitive. The second is humor, playful deflection that diffuses tension. The third is redirect, shifting conversation toward a positive storyline. But here, none of those happened. Instead, all parties remained still, as if frozen by the absurdity of the accusation. And that stillness created the impression that something was wrong, even if nothing actually was. Ask yourself a simple question. Have you ever sent a message, watched someone read it, and waited in silence for their reply, only to feel your anxiety grow with every passing second? Silence changes perception. Silence amplifies worry. Silence creates meaning where none existed. That's what happened here. The public took the silence as confirmation. The rumor gained weight simply because no one removed it. A vacuum formed, and public imagination filled it. Now let's zoom into Galvan's perspective. From a brand standpoint, speaking publicly about the rumor would elevate it. Acknowledging it would legitimize it. Addressing it would connect the brand to it. So the instinct inside the company was likely to stay silent, hoping it would burn out. But here's the twist. The silence didn't neutralize the narrative. It hardened it. Fashion storytelling doesn't need truth, it needs atmosphere. And silence created the atmosphere of uncertainty. Meanwhile, stylists, the invisible power brokers of celebrity fashion, began distancing themselves without ever saying they were. They did it through selective availability, through unfortunately already loaned messages, through "this piece may not be the right fit for the current moment," through polite avoidance disguised as professionalism. These signals didn't appear in public, but they shape industry behavior more than hashtags ever could. Let's turn next to Meghan's side of the silence. Meghan has learned through experience that responding to rumors gives them oxygen. So she didn't respond. She didn't deny. She didn't clarify. She didn't post a counterimage, a wardrobe credit, or a gentle nod to the designer. And here's the irony. Her silence, meant to defuse, intensified, because audiences interpreted it not as restraint, but as avoidance. Then there's Netflix. A promotional campaign is supposed to generate buzz, excitement, anticipation, not meme chaos. Netflix saw the reaction, monitored sentiment, watched engagement, and said nothing. Why? Because acknowledging a wardrobe controversy would undermine the seriousness of the promotional narrative. So silence became the corporate shield. But shields don't stop rumors. They simply allow them to multiply unchecked. Now we arrive at the emotional heart of this chapter, the public's hunger for explanation. People didn't understand the story, so they created versions that satisfied them. Some said Meghan borrowed the dress without permission. Some said Galvan regretted being linked to her. Some said the promo team scrambled to erase credit tags. None of these claims were verified, but verification didn't matter. The story felt more interesting when told dramatically, and audiences like drama more than accuracy. Here's a question for the audience. Have you ever watched two people silently avoid addressing tension, and felt the tension grow simply because neither spoke? That's exactly what played out here, but on a global stage. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Galvan's PR division likely had emergency discussions. Not public ones, internal ones. Should we clarify sourcing? Should we subtly float a stylist quote? Should we leak a narrative about neutrality? Should we say nothing and hope the storm passes? Should we signal distance through upcoming lookbooks? These are the kinds of conversations that happen when a brand fears alignment but fears acknowledgement even more. And now consider retailers. They don't need statements. They need reassurance. When reassurance doesn't come, they behave cautiously. Caution, in the fashion world, looks like reduced reorders, shortened window displays, less prominent placement, removal from editorial features, delayed restocks. None of these are visible to the public. All of them are devastating to a brand. The silence didn't just allow the rumor to spread. It allowed interpretation to mutate into belief. Even people who didn't believe it literally believed it symbolically. They believed it represented something. Something about Meghan's reputation. Something about public perception. Something about why brands now hesitate. Silence turned the rumor into a metaphor. And metaphors are far more powerful than facts. Let's turn to the emotional effect on consumers. Luxury buyers are not impulsive. They are image-conscious. They fear embarrassment more than cost. So when silence created uncertainty, buyers avoided the dress not because they disliked it, but because they feared conversation attached to it. Nobody wants to wear something that invites snickering. Luxury is supposed to elevate, not expose. And now we reach the most uncomfortable truth of this chapter. Silence became the story. The lack of denial became the narrative. The absence of response became evidence. The vacuum became the stage. But the silence did something even more damaging. It emboldened commenters. Suddenly, people weren't afraid to joke. They weren't afraid to speculate. They weren't afraid to escalate. Because no one stepped forward to stop them. That's when the meme economy evolved into something sharper. Screenshots of sales charts, real or fabricated. Claims that boutiques were pulling stock. Fake insider anecdotes. Pretend stylist testimonies. Mock interviews. Satirical headlines mistaken for real ones. The silence made parody masquerade as truth. Now imagine the effect inside Galvan. The CEO, Katherine Holmgren, watching as the dress became a digital caricature. Watching as the brand was dragged into a conversation it never consented to. Watching as the silence that felt safe became the silence that suffocated. This is when, according to circulating whispers, someone inside the company allegedly expressed the sentiment the internet would later repeat. Thanks, but don't wear it again. Whether it was ever said aloud is irrelevant. The rumor now had a second layer, a counter-rumor. The silence created it. The silence fed it. The silence protected it. And the silence poisoned the brand's emotional value. Which leads us to the cliffhanger that propels us into the next phase of the story. Because silence wasn't the end of the problem. It was the doorway to a much more explosive one. The private conversations began. The insider speculation intensified. And someone, somewhere, allegedly leaked the sentence that would redefine the entire narrative. Then someone allegedly spoke, privately. Was it frustration? Was it sarcasm? Was it strategy? Or was it nothing more than a whispered interpretation that spiraled into an industry-wide belief? That's the question that cracks open this chapter, because the alleged remark, the one line that people repeated, screenshot, reshared, and dramatized, became the centerpiece of the story. The sentence that turned a rumor into a headline-shaped shadow. The phrase that made the public stop scrolling and say, wait, did the CEO of a luxury brand really say that? And if she didn't, why does it feel like she could have? That's where the drama intensifies, because sometimes the most powerful lines in a scandal are the ones no one can prove were ever spoken. Let's rewind to the moment the rumor about the comment began circulating. It didn't appear in a newspaper. It didn't come from a press release. It didn't arrive from someone with a title or a verified profile. It came through the back channels of online discourse. The digital equivalent of a whisper passed from table to table in a dimly lit restaurant. Someone claimed that someone else claimed that someone overheard that someone connected to Galvan London allegedly said it. Layers of distance. Layers of ambiguity. Layers of plausible deniability. And yet, the sentence caught fire anyway. Ask yourself, why that line? Why that wording? Why that tone? Because it felt cinematic. It felt sharp. It felt like something a composed CEO might say in private when diplomacy slips and honesty escapes. It felt like the kind of remark that doesn't belong in public, yet defines the truth people want to believe. And that's where the emotional engine of this chapter lives, in the difference between what is confirmed and what feels believable. The idea that Galvan London, a brand built on sophistication and restraint, might privately recoil from Meghan's association created a magnetic narrative pull. It suggested tension behind the curtains. It suggested discomfort professionals weren't allowed to express. It suggested that even elegance has boundaries, and that those boundaries had been crossed. The sentence became a symbol, not just a quote. A symbol of brand fatigue, of reputational risk, of the moment when glamour becomes burden. Now imagine how quickly the phrase traveled. Stylists heard it. Fashion bloggers hinted at it. Comment sections quoted it. Talk show hosts alluded to it with raised eyebrows. The sentence spread not because anyone could verify it, but because no one could entirely dismiss it. And that's the dangerous middle ground where rumors thrive. If a lie is outrageous, it dies. If a lie is boring, it dissolves. But if a lie feels emotionally plausible, it becomes folklore. Let's turn inward, into the imagined boardroom where the line might have been spoken. Picture Katherine Holmgren, the CEO of Galvan London, reviewing the fallout. Sales softening. Retailers hesitating. Social sentiment dipping. The dress becoming meme material instead of a luxury aspiration symbol. Would frustration be understandable? Absolutely. Would a candid remark slip out in a moment of exhaustion? Possibly. Would it be quoted accurately if passed along? Almost certainly not. And yet, the story formed anyway, not from official sources, but from collective imagination. This raises another question for the audience to sit with. Have you ever heard something about someone you didn't entirely believe, but still repeated because it felt true? That's the psychological fuel behind the alleged comment. It wasn't adopted because people trusted the source. It was adopted because people trusted the narrative. The sentence crystallized what many already felt: that the association had hurt the brand more than it helped it. The alleged quote gave language to an emotion. Meanwhile, inside Galvan, whether the line was said or not, the rumor of it forced internal reflection. Employees wondered if the company would need to shift direction. Marketing teams debated whether future placements should be more tightly controlled. Sales directors reconsidered celebrity exposure metrics. Brand strategists evaluated how to subtly reshape consumer associations. Silence was no longer passive, it became tactical. Now let's explore how the rumor affected Meghan. Public figures are accustomed to exaggeration, distortion, satire, and criticism, but this one hit differently because it implied rejection. It implied that a luxury brand, the kind of institution celebrities are expected to elevate simply by existing near it, allegedly wanted distance. And that implication stung socially, not just reputationally. The idea that a dressmaker might recoil implied that the cultural tide had turned, that Meghan no longer elevated brands, but strained them. But here's where the chapter takes an ironic twist. The alleged comment didn't just reflect the public perception, it shaped it. People who hadn't formed an opinion about the situation suddenly had one. People who hadn't sensed tension now felt it. People who hadn't cared about the story were pulled into it. The comment became the emotional pivot point. It reframed the gown controversy from internet noise into a narrative of rejection. Fashion insiders, the ones who speak through implication rather than statements, began signaling that the partnership between Meghan and luxury labels might be entering a frost period. They didn't say it directly. They said it through absence, omission, redirection, which, in the language of fashion, is louder than words. Now imagine how journalists reacted. They didn't print the quote as fact. They printed stories shaped around the atmosphere it created. Headlines like, "Is Meghan still a style influencer? Has celebrity endorsement power flipped? Do luxury brands fear association fatigue?" The alleged comment became the ghost in every paragraph. Never cited, always felt. Here's where the emotional pacing shifts again. Because the rumor didn't stay contained to fashion circles. It entered discussions about public image, influence economics, and the reversal of celebrity marketing power. The idea that a brand could be harmed, not helped, by a celebrity wearing it represented a cultural shift, a recalibration of status, a reversal of the old order. And that reversal created fear. Fear inside fashion houses, fear among stylists, fear among marketers, fear among celebrities whose influence depends on desirability. Because if Meghan, someone who once sold coats in minutes, crashed websites, and fueled global fashion frenzies, could allegedly trigger a sales decline, what did that mean for everyone else? Now comes the escalation. The alleged comment didn't just reflect a moment. It triggered a movement. Other brands, quietly, discreetly, cautiously, began reconsidering association strategies. Not officially, not publicly, but internally, where decisions are made long before the public sees the effect. And suddenly, the story was no longer about a gown. It was about a shift in power, a shift in influence, a shift in cultural appetite. Which brings us to the mini cliffhanger that bridges us into the next chapter. Because the fallout from the alleged comment didn't stay contained, it rippled into retail, into press coverage, into celebrity styling circles, into whispered conversations at Fashion Week previews, into brand forecasting models, and into one specific arena that would escalate the situation far more dramatically than anyone anticipated. Because the fallout had only begun, and what happened next would expose just how deeply the association had shaken the industry, and who was willing to say so publicly. Every industry has back channels, but none quite like fashion. Deals are made in whispers. Reputations shift through glances. Decisions are communicated not through announcements, but through absences. And that's where this chapter begins, with the hook that reframes the narrative. Retailers didn't publicly reject the Galvan gown after Meghan wore it. They didn't issue statements. They didn't declare discomfort. They didn't distance themselves openly. Instead, something far more revealing happened. They reacted without reacting. They spoke without speaking. They signaled without words. So here's the question that pulls us into the heart of this chapter. How do retailers communicate hesitation when they don't want anyone to know they're hesitating? And how did those quiet decisions become a louder indictment than any headline ever could? Let's step inside the world of luxury retail, where every detail matters, from how long a dress hangs in a display window to whether a sales associate mentions it first or waits for a customer to ask. In this world, perception is currency, prestige is fragile, and association, especially with a public figure whose reputation is in flux, can make or break a buying season. So when Meghan Markle appeared in the Galvan gown and the online narrative soured, retailers did what retailers always do when they smell volatility. They shifted. But here's the twist. The shift was subtle, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. That's what makes this chapter so compelling. The reaction wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. It was strategic. The first sign came in product placement. Dresses inspired by Meghan's look. The same cut, same finish, same silhouette, were quietly moved from the front racks to mid-level visibility. Still present, but not highlighted. Still available, but not showcased. Still purchasable, but not pushed. In retail psychology, that repositioning speaks volumes. Then came the second sign, the language change. Retailers didn't say the dress was popular. They didn't say it was trending. They didn't say it was a spotlight piece. Instead, they used softer terms like classic option and clean design. In the fashion world, that's code for safe, but not socially charged. Buyers heard it. Stylists heard it. Industry watchers heard it. The third shift was more impactful: reorder delays. Retailers routinely replenish items that move well, anticipate demand, or align with seasonal trends. But after the promo image circulated, reorder confirmations began slowing. Not stopped. Slowing. Emails that once received replies in hours suddenly took days. Inventory requests were met with reviewing projections. That phrase is the fashion equivalent of holding your breath. Now ask yourself this. Have you ever been in a room where someone didn't say something, but you could feel what they meant anyway? That's what was happening at scale. The hesitation wasn't verbal. It was atmospheric. Let's turn now to the consumer-facing layer. Luxury shoppers who might have once purchased the gown changed behavior too. They didn't express disapproval. They expressed distance. They browsed, but didn't try on. They admired, but didn't request fitting rooms. They held fabric between two fingers, but didn't drape it over their bodies. That tiny gesture, touch without commitment, is one retailers know well. It means desire diluted by image anxiety. And here's where the chapter deepens. Because retailers don't just respond to consumer behavior, they anticipate it. If customers seemed uncertain, retailers adjusted inventory forecasts. If customers seemed amused rather than inspired, retailers reduced exposure. If customers seemed wary of the social implications, retailers shifted messaging. All without ever mentioning Meghan, the gown, or the meme storm. But the most fascinating part? None of this was coordinated. It happened organically, simultaneously, instinctively. As though the industry shared a subconscious reaction. That's how influence markets behave when celebrity association becomes unstable. They contract. Quietly. Elegantly. Brutally. Now let's zoom into conversations happening behind boutique counters. Sales associates are trained to guide purchasing psychology. Gently, subtly, persuasively. They know when to encourage, when to praise, when to spark urgency. But suddenly, the language changed. Instead of saying, "This dress is in high demand," they said, "We have other pieces you might love too." Instead of, "This silhouette is trending everywhere," they said, "This one has a timeless feel." Instead of, "Celebrities adore this label," they said, "It depends what look you're going for." Those lines aren't neutral. They are redirections. And redirection is the retail version of refusal. Now comes the emotional pivot of this chapter. Stylists. They are the invisible dictators of fashion visibility. They choose who wears what, and when, and in front of which cameras. Stylists don't wait for brand statements. They read cultural energy like meteorologists read wind speeds. And after Meghan wore the Galvan gown, stylists recalibrated.